One day in 1919, a man came across a book entitled Building Standards.
我的外祖父朱继贤呢，当时在南京的时候，那个在图书馆发现了这个李明仲的《营造法式》的这手抄本，当时看了以后呢非常兴奋，因为当时来说呢，中国的古建筑这个主要的研究呢，就是实际上就是国外有些日本人呢拍了一些照片。也比较简单。当时国人呢，在中国的这个建筑的历史技术上来说，就没有什么文献的这个现代人的研究。
After returning to Beijing, he photocopied the book at his own expense and invited Tao Xiang, a distinguished book collector and carver, to bind it. Talking of this afterwards, Zhu Qiqian confessed that after reading Li's book, I became more interested in Chinese architecture, which in turn led me to more discoveries. In 1925, Tao Xiang published Building Standards. In order to further study Chinese architecture, Zhu Qiqian established a research institute called the Society of Chinese Architecture. Several years later, he organized an exhibition of Chinese architecture and subsequently received his first government grant. Zhu grasped the opportunity to set up the Society for Research into Chinese Architecture, the first of its kind in the country. Meanwhile, Zhu thought that since ancient architectural methods had been mainly transferred orally from generation to generation, the architectural jargon had to be interpreted. But the Society for Research into Chinese Architecture had no access to modern architects, both decent knowledge of sinology and modern technology.
由于这个我外祖父呢，那会儿出过国，对国外一些的这个先进的科学比较重视，怎么整理这些资料呢？就需要有一个团体来办这个事儿，需要找一批人呢，就是不仅对中国这个汉学有一定基础，对中国古建筑有兴趣，而且要懂得国外的这个调研科学的这个研究方法，这样才能把这个我们这个传统的这个工程技术文化这个营造学吧，整理出再来传给后世。
In 1931, US-educated Liang Shecheng joined the Society for Research into Chinese Architecture, taking the position of director of the Department of Building Standards. The society was relocated in the Forbidden City, very close to the front entrance. Liang started his academic career here by focusing on ancient Chinese architecture. At the time, ancient Chinese architecture was not being studied by academics. Liang reckoned that China should showcase its long architectural history to the world, and it was a Chinese architect's mission to introduce it. In 1932, Liang completed his monograph, Rules and Examples of Qing-style Architectural Craftsmanship. In order to compare it with building standards, the Song dynasty, Liang wanted to find wooden structures built 1,000 years ago. In April, Liang began the first ever field investigation. In the 1920s and 30s, there was still a wide gap between the urban intelligentsia and rural peasants. When city dwellers went to the countryside, they were not only upset by the outdated infrastructure, they were often mugged and attacked. Dule Temple, located in Ji County, is only 80 kilometers from Beijing. But it took Liang and his team more than 3 hours to get there. Talking with his wife on the phone that night, Liang said, "There are no bandits, and the 4 of us are staying in a hotel for..." In 1931, a new recruit named Liu Dunhuang, who had been educated in Japan, joined the society. His excellent knowledge and interest in China and the country's traditional architecture was soon called upon.
刘敦桢这个汉学基础非常雄厚，所以他来的时候呢，他是作为文献部的主任来的。但是我觉得刘敦桢他也是非常有头脑的，他也是觉得你光从文献这方面并不能解决什么问题，所以后来他就也搞这个野外调查。
Liang believed that both structures from the Liao dynasty had been found by accident. How could they ensure that those historic sites were protected? The members of the society decided to go to the countryside for 2 to 3 months each year to search for historic sites. Before starting out, they had to comprise a list of structures that they wanted to find. The field studies took them to the Longxing Temple in Zhengding in Hebei, a wooden tower in Ying County, Shaanxi Province, and the Jiaozhou Bridge. Numerous visits and investigations led the society to its most significant discovery. In June 1937, Liang and his team visited Shaanxi Province and came across one of the oldest temples in a little-known village. The discovery of this 1,000-year-old temple astounded the world. Looking at the magnificent and lofty temple that stood tall under the setting sun, they were overjoyed by happiness. Then, their life was turned upside down when Japan launched an all-out war in northern China. At the beginning of 1938, Liang's family moved to Kunming. But being on the run for thousands of kilometers, the family was forced to throw away nearly all their belongings, except for their original materials on ancient architecture collected before the war. Photographic plates that were inconvenient to carry and precious materials were left in an underground vault at a foreign bank in Tianjin. But unexpectedly, the vault was submerged when Tianjin was flooded in 1939. Zhu Qiqian, who was in his 70s at the time and residing in Beiping, tried to save the materials.
这朱启潜呢就急得不得了，就赶快就是写信，要梁思成和这个刘敦桢签字同意把这一批东西拿出来。那么等到他几番周折，拿到梁思成和刘敦桢同意领出这批东西的签字的信以后呢，这些东西已经泡了一段时间了，所以拿出来以后，所有的底片都毁了。当时调查用的这个册稿是硫酸纸的，都粘在一块儿了，都是朱启潜一页一页的带着人一页一页的把它们晾干的。这样的话呢，把这批册稿才保存下来。
In Kunming, prospects for the Society for Research into Chinese Architecture seemed gloomy. Due to a lack of funding, Liang and his wife were forced to earn a living with whatever work they could find. Eventually, Mo Zongjiang, Liu Jiping, Liu Dunzhen and Chen Mingda all reached Kunming, and the society became active again in 1939. In the autumn of 1939, Liang and his colleagues took a 6-month study tour, visiting 40 counties in Sichuan province. The cliff tomb in Jiangkou town, Hongshan County, to the west of Sichuan, reflected the features of Han Dynasty wooden architecture, thereby providing evidence for the research of early Chinese architecture. In the winter of 1940, the Japanese army intensified its airstrikes over Kunming, and the society was forced to move to Lijuang, near Yibin in Sichuan. Despite the turmoil, Liang, as a consultant to the Allied forces, demonstrated his extraordinary vision. He argued that the ancient Japanese cities of Kyoto and Nara should not be bombed by the US. He believed the ancient structures there were cultural relics belonging to all mankind, rather than any single country. When Japanese media reported this news, Liang was regarded by the Japanese as the benefactor of those ancient cities. Just like farmers, in order to continue their work. During this period, they also managed to resume the publication of their regular journal that had been suspended due to the war. It was also during this period that Luo Zifu joined the society. Since his name sounded similar to US President Roosevelt's Chinese pronunciation, he was fondly called President. Afterwards, Liang helped change his name to Luo Zhewen, the last member of the society still alive today.
在李庄这短短这5年呀，学会了测绘、画图，也写一点这个报告。这可以说这5年给我这一生打下了个比较初步的基础吧。
The news of the victory against the Japanese reached Lijuang on August 31st, 1945. Despite the victory, the society, as a non-governmental academic group, still suffered from a lack of funding. Zhu Qiqian, the founder of the society, had used up all his own money and was unable to maintain its operation anymore. In 1945, the Society for Research into Chinese Architecture finally came to an end. A great tragedy for Chinese architects. At the height of its existence, the Society for Research into Chinese Architecture had nearly 100 members. It ran a 15-year-long systematical project represented by Zhu Qiqian, Liang Shecheng, Liu Dunzhen, Lin Huiyin, Liu Jiping, Mo Zongjiang, and Chen Mingda, as well as other scholars from home and abroad such as Bao Ding, Ernst Buschmann from Germany, Chen Huan, Chen Ji, Wilmer Fairbank from America, Guo Baochang, Li Seguang, Araki Seizo from Japan, Xu Shezhang, Ye Gongchuo, Zhu Jiahua, and Zhang Shuoliang. Since its establishment, the Society had taken rules and examples of engineering construction from the Qing dynasty and building standards from the Song dynasty as its textbooks. It selected ancient Chinese structures as examples and adopted modern Western technology to study 2,783 ancient structures in 190 counties and cities. They also surveyed and drew 200 groups of old buildings and completed nearly 2,000 graphs. The Society published the History of Chinese Architecture as well as a pictorial history of Chinese architecture in English. This was a major achievement in the study of Chinese architecture. On December the 13th, 1948, a roar of guns broke out on the outskirts of Beijing, heralding in a new chapter in Chinese history. At that moment, Liang felt extremely worried, not only for the city's residents, but also for the ancient city itself. Soon, several PLA soldiers visited Liang and asked for advice on the cultural relics that needed to be protected in case they had to storm the city proper. So Liang labeled the most important historic sites and relics on a military map. Eventually, the PLA took the city of Beijing without firing a single shot. Shortly afterwards, the Society for Research into Chinese Architecture and Tsinghua University presented the new government with a list of ancient architectural monuments that is still of great significance today.
这个目录起了很大的作用，除了解放战争里头避免炮打身伤，同时当时这个接管呀，解放战争接管一些地方啊，这些地方的一些这个同志啊、官员啊，对古建筑文物保护也不知道啊，所以发给他们，让他们注意保护。所以这个，而且这个保护的目录啊，一直到现在还发挥作用。比如说第一批全国重点文物保护单位，那完全就是根据那个来的，那就算营造学社做了这么个贡献。
In his paper, Chinese Architecture, Art and Artifacts, Liang Shecheng wrote, "The main purpose of studying ancient architecture is to analyze the historical evolution of engineering. This is an attempt to better understand oneself as well as others, both past and present. Only when an architect deepens his knowledge and appreciation for his own country can he be more creative and confident in his work? That's the essence of studying Chinese architecture. Since the Society for Research into Chinese Architecture was founded in 1929, more than 80 years have passed. In the past 80 years, Chinese architects have expressed their own interpretation of ancient Chinese architecture in their designs. These buildings show the vitality and diversity of a long-lasting cultural legacy.